looking at my set of tiles. Why don't you start, then Emily, Mary Catherine, go through it. Go ahead.
Okay. Scott Bailey, member of the committee.
Emily Courtnidge, Director of Purchasing and Contracting.
Janice Hansen, PPS Internal Auditor.
Mary Catherine Moore, Internal Performance Auditor.
Parker Myris, member of Student Reps.
Jackson Weinberg, the other student rep.
Michelle DePass, board member and audit committee member.
Okay.
Kara Bradshaw, executive assistant.
Kate Wilkinson, public member.
Roseanne Powell, board manager.
Great. And Kate, it's great to see you in person.
Yeah, I know, huh?
It's the first time. It's great to see everybody else in person as well, but in person. So
Yes.
welcome. So welcome everybody. We have a pretty full agenda, and I'm going to try and make sure that we wrap up in time. We're going to change the order of the agenda just slightly because Claire Hertz, the Deputy Superintendent for Business and Operations, is in another meeting till 5. So we're going to, we were going to discuss the implementation of the contract audits first and then go to the audit plan, but we're going to go to the audit plan, which Claire has already provided her feedback on. We're going to do that first and then go to the contract implementation when Claire is able to join us. So the first thing is just ministerial. It's a, people should have gotten a copy of the informal minutes, and we don't need to approve them. If anybody has any questions about them or something that needs to be corrected, please share that with Kara or Roseanne. Any questions or comments about the minutes? Okay.
Good to me.
Great. Okay. And thank you, Kara, for putting those together. It's really helpful to get sort of a detailed overview of what the discussion was. So the next item on our agenda is the draft 2021 audit plan proposal. And in the as everybody may recall, for 1920, there's 2 audits that are still underway from the 1920 audit plan, and that's the P-card audit and the ACH audit. So while that is in the document that was sent, we're not really asking the committee to discuss or approve that because it's already been discussed, approved, and they're well underway. So this is what we're really looking for today, before I turn it over to the 2 district performance auditors, is every year this committee forwards to the full board recommendations on the audit plan, and the Mary Catherine and Janice have created, based on their assessment of the risk and conversations, and they'll go through more of this, they've come up with a series of recommendations for this committee to consider, and ideally, unless there is not a consensus, that this committee would then make a recommendation to the full board, so the full board can consider it. And before the presentation, I guess there's 2 other sort of guardrails. Or not guardrails. Maybe one's a guardrail and the other is a just a note. Is that a guardrail would be there were a number of other topics that were had been reviewed by the auditors as potential topics that have not been chosen and that are not being recommended for us to advance to the full board for the 2021 audit plan. I'm happy at a future committee meeting to discuss those items that we're not going to be discussing today or advancing if people want to have a discussion about them. But I really want, just given the amount of time we have, focus on the items that are being recommended. So that's what we're going to start with. And then the other issue that I want to just say that we should, we'll be putting on the calendar for a future discussion is this morning, Director Constam asked about moving the ESL audit into this year's audit plan. And because that wasn't something that had been recommended by the auditors, I'm not going to insert it today because we haven't had time for them to prepare for us to have that discussion. But I do want to put it on a future committee meeting agenda so that if there is interest by any of the committee members and the auditors recommend we add it in, that we give space to that. But because this came in this morning and it wasn't on the auditor's recommended plan, I'm going to move that to a future meeting. Is that okay with people?
That's fine with me. I also wanted to let everyone know I'm going to step out of the meeting at about 5:30 for about 15 minutes and I'll come back. That said, there's something on the agenda regarding recruitment of an additional community member, and I'd like to be part of that conversation. So if we have to move that around as well, I just want to let you know.
It should be just perfect because we're going to address that during other business. So which it should work.
Thank
as
you.
long as you come back.
I will come back.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions about the scope of our discussion here on the audit plan?
So yes, so there's a topic that I've asked for at least 2 years now, and that's the hardship transfer process. And I understand it didn't make the recommended list, but I'd kind of like to know, to me, when I compare it to, gee, are we losing some money from renting out district facilities? That to me doesn't look to me like a huge priority compared to a process that affects thousands of students. And I think there's a lot of issues there. And there may be other, ELL is another issue that Director Constant brought up. So I'd like just a more of a discussion before we send priorities to the board about what made the cut or what we would recommend.
So I wanted to add to that, and that's that when we're making these difficult choices, if we had a way to make decisions that, if for instance, had an equity impact, that might help us prioritize one, audit over another. I agree the hardship transfer process is important. So is the English as a second language. And so is the facility usage, because that's where fraud can happen. So I think it's a great idea to have an additional discussion, and perhaps we should use an equity lens on how we're prioritizing our audit.
Great.
Was I on mute the entire time?
No.
No.
We heard you.
We would have told you, Michelle.
No, we were listening. So I'm hearing hardship transfers, ELL, and an equity lens.
That we have a way to make decisions when we're trying to prioritize, audits that are equally as important. The hardship transfer process is important. English as a second language program audit is important, and perhaps we can make those decisions easier by coming up with a way to make decisions that includes an equity lens, an equity impact statement. In other words, if one of these audits has more of an impact on how children of color are being served in our community, that might that might bring rise an audit up. Recommendation.
Yeah, so I really appreciate the committee members' discussion. Kate, did you have anything that?
No. Oh, I'm on mute, aren't I? Am I on mute? No, I'm not.
No, you're not.
No. I looked at the agenda and we went over it, or over the proposed plan yesterday, and I made my suggestions then. So.
Okay.
Fine. Thanks.
Jackson, do you guys have any, the student reps have any thing about the scope before we dive into the specific recommendations?
No.
I just like to point out that Janice did sort of a really smart thing, in my opinion, and that's if buildings were to open back up, the building safety would then be moved to the top of the list,
Right.
which I think is a really smart move. But about the scope more generally, no, nothing.
Okay, so I'm thinking about how we're about ready to dive in just a minute into the draft audit plan, but how we'll formulate this, because it would be good for us, and maybe we do, maybe we send 2 out, and then just like we did last year, and then have the additional follow-up discussion, and then potentially, if we wanted to have that be the 3rd audit, or replace one of the other ones, we could do that. I say the 2 of the audits are almost complete. The ACH, we're just waiting for the district to actually put some transactions through, so there's a control group. But we should be able to move from them. And to the equity lens, Michelle, maybe I'm thinking just in the future, we have this sort of the template that's being utilized that has the objectives, goals, background information, risks, planning, the estimated hours, and then the scope. I'm thinking it would be useful to be really intentional to ask, as we're scoping the audit, whether this has a disproportionate positive or potential positive or negative impact on students of color. And that way we can really, I think, as we're looking at it, also be holding that, it as a primary value along with some of this other information. Is that something that we could add in future? I mean, for example, the building, the audit of the building usage. One of the equity pieces is 2 years ago, I think it was now, Scott, we asked the district to create a waiver for Title I, CSI, and TSI schools, that they could have their custodial, the custodial fees waived, so that they actually could have community events, because a lot of schools weren't able to do it. And so auditing whether, those schools know about that and actually are using it, because there's no sense having a waiver of the fees so that school communities that can't afford to pay them are able to use it if nobody's actually using it or they don't know about it.
I think that's great. And I also think that the waiver should be tied to a community, not a building necessarily. In other words, if we're working with IRCO, immigrant refugee community, and there's a Somali community that needs to use a building in our system, then they might want to use a TSI school. They might want to use Lincoln High School. And so the waiver is tied to the community, not to the building.
So I think that is a great potential change of policy that may be recommended if we find that nobody's using it, or if we say it looks like the current AD is too restrictive and nobody's using it. But that's an example of taking what might be considered just like a standard, building efficiency and effectiveness of the use of the buildings and adding an equity lens. Like there is this equity waiver in there, but are people actually using it and like testing that as part of the audit? So why don't we have Janice and Mary Catherine share the recommended audit plan. I've asked them not to like go over the P-card or the ACH audit because we've actually already approved, the board already approved the audit and it's already underway. So that we don't need to have that audit. So Janice, why don't you and Mary Catherine jump in with and do it in the order of priority. And we'll see if we have a consensus on what to advance to the board.
All right, so thank you very much for the opportunity to bring this to you guys. I did present just my desktop, but you guys should be able to see this in board books also. I will say that there are a couple of minor typos and errors here that I need to update. And then also there was a request for me to be more specific in relationship to the timing of when the audit would be expected. So I will get an updated version of this out to you guys. I just need to consult with Mary Catherine before I commit to a really good time frame on, but I will put that in here and I will get it out to you guys tomorrow. So let me just kind of up here at the top, the summary. The number one item, like Julia said, these first two are already audits that are approved. So while they are on the list, you know, I'm just acknowledging that we are still working on them. The next one is the ASB and student body funds. So as a side note, I appreciate the recommendation for kind of adding that column related to equity impact. And so I will do that for future audit plans, add a section for equity impact and take that into consideration. I will say that unfortunately, Scott, you were the only one I wasn't able to talk to you before this committee meeting, where I was able to really talk through my rationale and decision-making process for the proposal. So I apologize I wasn't able to get to you, but we can follow up on that. I will be very detailed with you. So the first audit that I want to talk to you guys about.
Jess, I'm sorry to interrupt. Are other people getting a lag, or is that just my laptop?
It's you.
I think it's you.
Okay, I'm gonna remove my video so I can hear. Sorry.
Okay, so I am proposing that the first audit after the roll-up audits would be an ASB audit, and ASB or student body funds audit to determine whether the district has adequate internal controls to ensure the complete and accurate recording, tracking, and safeguarding of student body funds. So I went to PeopleSoft to try to figure out how much we were receiving, and I couldn't get the exact number, but I found in last year's financial statements, we are actually receiving over $7 million last year in associated or in the ASB funds. So that's a lot of transactions that are taking place district-wide, and there's relatively very little internal control or oversight in this area. So I think there's a big risk here. Do you guys have any specific questions about what an ASB audit or student body funds audit would entail? Or should I just keep going?
So I would be really getting a quick overview of what that entails.
Okay.
Like how many people are transacting, contributing to those transactions?
So
are those funds decided like per student in the building, et cetera? Yeah, I just would like a little bit more information.
Okay, so Student body funds are restricted use funds. They are funds that can only be used for a very specific purpose, and it's highly regulated. Those funds cannot be receipted into our general fund. They have to be receipted into the associated student body fund, and the use of those funds is restricted to a very specific purpose. So we can't use them for anything other than what they are intended for. So there are ASB funds that are receipted at every single school throughout the district. And when something is happening at every single school within the district, and there's not a very clear and concise standard operating procedure that is provided to each school building, then what the risk is everybody's kind of doing it in a slightly different way. And that is really inefficient, and it's a very high risk area. Any type of cash receipting or cash handling is always high risk. It's just really ripe for opportunities for fraud. And we haven't done an audit of ASB funds receipting, accounting for them. Like an example would be like at a school, I would look and ask for a list of fundraising events, and say they said, oh, we had these 5 fundraising events. And so I would go to look in the accounting for those receipts associated with those 5 events. And for example, what if I find only 4 deposits were made? Well, what happened to the other fundraising deposit? Perhaps it was miscoded, and I could look for it in that way. So there's so many different ways in which this area is high risk, but not having an audit and not having in the past and not having a very clear and concise standard operating procedures that everybody kind of has to follow. We definitely have training that is available. I went online and I looked, and so there is training available, but it is high level. So it's a very risky area. Does that answer enough, Michelle, or do you want me to kind of try to keep going?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, awesome.
And I believe a couple of years ago, some schools at least had their own independent bank account. And they, says it all.
I will be looking for that.
I think that got reined in pretty quickly. That was, I think, once our superintendent discovered that.
That's a big risk. And I've seen that at a lot of different school districts. They don't, there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect between general business practices that people in central administration might be more comfortable with. And then out at the schools, they are much more focused in on students. And sometimes the business practices aren't always kind of transmitted out to them in a very robust way. And I think they're all trying to do a great job. But again, it's really important that we take a look at the guidance and the expectations, the training, the manual that we're providing, what procedures are required, what the reconciliation processes and procedures are, because it's just a really risky area. And hopefully I find that there are not any outside accounts, but I will be asking and looking for that. All right, so the next audit that I am recommending is this facility usage and building rentals audit. And thank you, Scott, for saying that you don't quite see the equity piece. That means that I didn't clearly communicate the equity piece in here, but my intent was to really address an equity risk associated with this. I think Julia mentioned this waiver, and I think by putting in our policy that we're providing a waiver, it says to me that the district is trying to provide equitable opportunities for community use of our facilities. And so I know that that's the intent because we put it in policy. And so the utilization of that waiver, I would really like to know if it's even being used, if it has been used. People that I've talked to so far were unfamiliar with the fact that there was even a waivering system. And so I am, I think that this is a really an opportunity to hone in on some potential equity. I copied in a piece into the background here, and I will send an updated with a little bit better language to hone in on the equitable opportunity risks that I see. And I will get that updated and send out to you because it is really my intent to not just focus on the risk of a lack of revenue. It is also risk associated with equitable opportunity to use school facilities. And the way in which the waiver is written, I copied that piece from the AD into the background information just because it was so difficult to understand. When I read it myself, and I'm an auditor, I was like, wait, so how would I get an exemption, and when is it? So it was pretty complicated. And so when things are complicated, it increases the risk of not utilizing the waiver. So I will update the risks to specifically address the opportunity for equitable use of our facilities by community organizations. And because that really, I do want to hone in on that piece of it in this audit. I also want to check for liability. Like, it does say that there is a risk, for legal liability if accidents occur, if the events that are held in our facilities are not being properly documented, and the community organizations are not providing their insurance to cover that liability, then accidents that might happen could potentially result in liability for the school district. So it's really important that we get district sponsored events and then community sponsored events classified correctly in the kind of the application process for utilization of our facilities. And one of the things that I've heard from custodians is that they'll show up to school and the gym will be a mess, and nobody even informed them that there was an event the previous night. And so even utilizing the system to request for the proper permissions to use our facilities is really important, and then categorizing them as a district sponsored event or a non-district sponsored event is also really important. So I will do a little bit of updates to this just to be more clear and concise about the equitable opportunity to utilize our facilities, because I do want to address that in this audit. Any questions about this one?
Well,
Also, I promise to update this. I'm not going to feed the custodian coverage. It should be fees, not feed. Sorry about that.
so this was an action we took, Julia, 2 years ago. And the communication was poor. I don't think the AD really captured the spirit of what the board was looking for. So I think there's some other dimensions to this as well. And it was, Scott School was kind of spearheaded the ask for this. And I know they used it, but at least early on, the communication was not very good going out to schools and parent groups at schools. And as much as yes, this is an important issue. I don't think it rises to the top for me in terms of priority. And that's, again, we can catch up on that. And us not getting together is me, not you. So, but
everybody's so busy. It's a really tough time to reach out, but I do want to follow up with you to kind of walk you through some of my thoughts.
And it looks like a lot of hours compared to some of the other audits. And so that's also, I think of the issue itself, where does it stack up, and also the amount of time it takes. So I just want to register those concerns.
Okay, thank you for that.
And I personally would not be ready to forward this to the full board as a priority until we have more discussion, but there you go.
So we'll circle back to that. So I will move on to the last audit that I am recommending, and then we will come back and talk about what we are actually going to recommend to the full board. So this last one, which is would become an immediate priority in the event that any in-person classes start back for students, it would become a priority. But what this would be is compliance with the building safety plan check. So for students to be received out at a school, the building would have to have a building safety plan. So I would get the building safety plan and then turn it into somewhat of a checklist. So say, for example, the building safety plan says that they should have hand sanitizer at these 3 locations. Then I would go to check to see if there's hand sanitizers in those 3 locations, and whether or not it's empty, or for example, one of the principals at some point in the past talked about turning a hallway into a one-way hallway. Well, if the building plan says that the hallway should be a one-way hallway, then when the bell rings, I will stand there and see if that hallway is being utilized as a one-way hallway. But each little piece of the building safety plan is really important, because it's a combination of all of those things that the little things that we're doing in those building safety plans that will help protect the students. So I want to be diligent and timely in the feedback. So what I want to do is commit to 2-day turnaround. So I will create the checklist, and then 2 days after I'm on site, I will deliver the results of that checklist to district administration, and that will give them very timely feedback about specific compliance with their building safety plan where students are being in person. So I think this is really a great audit, but only if students are going to be held in person. So it's the least of my priorities right now, because I have no idea if that's going to happen this year. But I did put a little asterisk by that in my prioritization up here that says if it does happen, then these health and safety checks audit will take priority over the other audits that are in place. And what I envisioned for this is like 1 day a week, Mary Catherine and I will go and do on site and do separately. She'll go to one building, I'll go to one building. So we'll try to do 2 buildings a week. And if we see strong compliance, we'll just keep moving forward with that. If we see some non-compliance with the practice, we might need to increase that and do more of them, maybe 2 days a week. So I really am asking for a little bit of flexibility associated with this, because we need to do it to the level at which we are seeing the risk. And I think at the beginning, the first couple of weeks, you know, it's highly likely that people are going to be super compliant with every little detail. But it's week 3 and week 10. Are we still going to be strict about making sure? So even over time, I want to keep doing them to make sure that the compliance with the safety plan is maintained for as long as the safety plan is required. Does that make sense? Any questions about that one? No?
I hope you have to do it this year, but I'd love to see you at Benson collaring Parker when he's going wrong way down the one-way hallway.
I plan to give Mary Catherine a bullhorn.
They're going to make you vice principal.
Like, get your mask over your nose. No, but seriously, I know I'm teasing about it, but it is really important. And the longer we do get back to school, that week 10 and week 12, I know that I have seen it in our community where right at first, the first couple weeks, you know, even the grocery stores were being super diligent about sanitizing the carts. Now, nobody's sanitizing the carts anymore. The hand sanitizer is almost out everywhere I go, you know, and so that over time becoming lax is even more of a risk from my perspective than the first couple of weeks.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I would say skip the first couple of weeks, which is kind of what you were alluding to, and wait, and it'd be more important to do it at least a month out, because everybody's going to be kind of on at those, like you said. So that makes sense to me.
I have a quick question relative to the hours spent on each audit, just for my own edification. And Director Bailey, you talked about the hours required, and I did notice like the ACH audit and the P-card audit, which I understand are in process, have fewer hours. How do you determine the hours, and are the hours on a particular audit relative to the amount of risk, or is there some other calculus that we don't know about?
Thank you so much for that question. This is a difficult thing for auditors to estimate. How many hours is it going to take for me to do this work? And it is extremely difficult to nail that down in a very precise way. And that is why you almost always hear delays in getting an audit report, because it's just not an exact science. It is at best an educated guess. So one of the things, like for the ACH audit, Mary Catherine had some experience doing ACH type audits in the past. And so I thought that we would be able to build on her experience, and it would take us less time because of that level of experience. And so that's why the hours on that one were a little bit lower, because she had some previous auditing experience in that very specific audit topic that we could utilize to benefit us in a way in which we don't have to spend as much time researching the topic. You know, for P-card audit, I have a lot of experience auditing P-card audits, and so again, the number of hours associated with that one was kind of picked before I came to PPS, but I do think it's realistic only because I have that experience, and it will allow us to be more efficient in our time. But audits like the ASB audit, I have experience there, but that is something that's going on at every single school, ASB receipts. And so I tried to think how much work is it going to take? So I have the experience, I know how to do it, I know what I'm looking for, I've done something similar in the past, But when you have to deal with a bunch of different locations and gathering information from those different locations, that's a lot of people to reach out to get information from. And so that really will take more time. But it is a educated guess at best. But thank you for the question. And I do try my best to try to be really precise. But it's not an exact science. I wish there was a class that they would teach on this in college for auditors to say, this is how many hours, but there's just not. And so we do our very best, but unfortunately, it's very common in the industry to not have that number be perfect.
So I'm going to just be cognizant of the agenda time, and
Okay.
I'm going to propose in a moment a path forward. But before we do that, are there any additional questions on either the ASB audit or the health and safety checks audit?
Yes, I have one.
Okay, go ahead.
What's the follow-up process going to look like for a building that's flagged as not in full compliance with the health and safety protocol?
So that is a great question, but unfortunately, I don't deal, that's not what I would do. My responsibility is to report on the compliance, and I want to deliver on that to district administration within 2 days of being on site, so they'll get it timely. But that is a question for district administration. What are they going to do about that is a great question, but it's just not my role and responsibility to oversee any follow-up of what do they do. But what I will say is if I see a bunch of non-compliance, I'm probably going to go back to that school in a couple weeks and check it again. That's what I would do.
Yeah, that completely answers my question.
Awesome.
Great. Anybody else have a question about those two audits? I'm going to propose something and we'll see. So if it's committee consensus that since we already have 2 in flight and the ASB audit is an educated guess that's 600 hours, so pretty substantial. And then the health and safety check, we talked about why it may be relevant in the short term. I'm wondering if people would be comfortable us recommending to the board these 2 audits to add them to the 2021 audit plan, and then at our next meeting have the discussion both about the hardship transfers, Director Bailey, that you raised, the ELL audit that Director Constam raised, and the last facility audit before making a decision on a recommendation to the board on that third piece. Would there be anyone who would have an issue with that being a recommendation coming out of this committee?
I can live with that.
I think that sounds good.
Was that Kate that just said that? Sorry.
I'm fine with that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Sorry, Michelle. What did you say?
I'm fine with that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Parker Jackson.
One quick, information question on the ASB audit. Would you do a sample of schools?
That is a great question. It's already been asked by somebody else, and I thought I was going to try to update it to try to say that. But what I will say is I will pick the schools based off risk. So there are certain reports and reconciliations that each school ASB coordinator needs to turn into finance. And so what I'll do is I'll reach out to finance and say, hey, are there any schools that are consistently late or don't always fill them out or don't turn them in? And those would be where I start with. But so those are the ones I would start with, those that are higher risk, but I would also try to get a geographical sampling. So take some from each of the different areas. And then I would also want to test by grade, a couple from different grades. So elementary school, middle school, and high school, they're going to do things in a very different way. So I want to get some of each, but I want to really hone in on risk first. So not just talk to accounting staff, but also, gather information to really see what schools are at higher risk, and hone in on those. But in addition to that, I will try to get a geographical sampling in addition to a grade sampling. So elementary and middle and high school, I'll try to get testing from each of those categories.
I would hope that we would look at high schools, especially as a higher risk group, focus more there because of the sheer number of transactions and the dollar volume.
I was thinking the same thing.
Does that answer your question, Scott?
Yeah, just roughly how many schools do you think you would
In one
get?
sentence.
I don't know. I
Okay.
didn't pick it. I would like to say maybe 10 transactions from 10. That's kind of what I think.
Yeah, not holding you to that, but just
Okay.
to give me an idea. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we have a consensus from the committee that will make a recommendation to the board to add those 2 items to the 2021 recommended audit plan. And at the next committee meeting, we'll have a discussion about the other audit topics. Of those 3, probably there's room for one more to be added in, so we can have a conversation about that. So thank you, Janice and Mary Catherine, for spending the time to. I know you talked to a lot of district staff and parents and other people to come up with those recommendations. So I appreciate that. Just to clarify, when we bring it to the board, if we could have the date that you anticipate, sort of like when you'd start on the 2 that aren't started yet, and the sort of maybe what you anticipate to be the ending dates for the 2 that are in flight would be helpful. And then that equity lens added to the matrix would be helpful.
Okay. Will do. And I'll get that updated draft to you guys with just the 2 on it, with those updates on it, and you'll have an opportunity to take a look at it. And I'll fix my spelling things too.
Great. So the next item on our agenda is the implementation plan for the contracts audit. And I don't know, Roseanne or Kara, do you think you could pull up on the screen the landscape version of the document?
Yeah, just give me a.
Or I don't know, I printed it landscape, so that's how I'm seeing it.
Okay.
It was also posted landscape, so we're good.
Okay. Well, there were 2 different orders, and this one is in the order of the actual recommendation numbers. Is the version. So as a refresher for everyone, in the 1920 audit plan, we had, and this came out of the Secretary of State's audit as well, a number of recommendations to take a deeper dive on our contracting process. The Office of Internal Performance Auditors, their first audit was the contracting process. They provided they did a presentation on the findings and the recommendations, and they provided that to the audit committee. Director Bailey, I think that happened before you joined the committee, and same thing with Parker and Jackson. I think that's correct. Maybe I'm wrong. And at the time, the decision was made that at the committee meeting in October, that staff would come back with their implementation plan. And so what we have is the implementation plan, the proposed implementation plan. And I'm wondering if it's possible to make that slightly larger on the screen.
Oh, there we go.
I've got to get things reorganized. Can everybody see that or have it somewhere where you can access it?
It looks pretty good on the screen. On
Okay.
the screen. It's small.
Yeah, I've got it on my own alternative screen. So
I'm going to suggest it's a 11-page document, and there's a lot of information here. What I'm going to suggest is we spend some time. We ask that Claire or Emily, whoever would be on point or wants to sort of frame up the approach the staff came up with on the action for the implementation plan, and then maybe just a brief overview. We could have any questions that are asked, and then I think just because of the scope of this, what I'm going to ask is that also people that you can submit questions or comments about particular parts of it, and that we'll take some of it offline, but because we could probably spend a fair amount of time talking in great detail, but I thought at least we'll do the overview, get it set up, hear about sort of the thinking of staff on the implementation, and then we can go from there. But I do, again, want to be respectful of everybody's time and have a hard stop at fairly close to 6. And we need actually, there's 2 things. We need 5 minutes for the community position on the committee. And then just I want to ask Roseanne and Kara, we don't have any public comment, do we? Okay, perfect. Great. So we'll say 5 minutes at the end for when Michelle gets back about the community process, and then we'll spend the time in between getting an overview and having like a first round of questions and discussion about this. So Emily or Claire?
I wanted to just insert one thing before I leave, and that's that you said there's a place to have discussions somewhere offline, just so everyone knows. Those will go to you. Questions, concerns?
Yeah, that would be great. And I'll put together a document that consolidates them all. For anything that doesn't get discussed here, I mean, obviously anything discussed here, we can drop it in or change it. But then, yes, because I have a fair number of things, some of them that don't warrant a discussion here today or using committee time. But okay, with that.
So I'm going to go ahead and start, and I'll try to keep my part to less than 5 minutes. And then I'll turn it over to Emily to give an overview of the areas in the finance department. This is a multi-department response. It's contracts. We do have a department that is responsible for contracts, and our director, Emily Courtnidge, does a phenomenal job in that role. She does work with many department leaders, so this includes work from Emily as well as Tracy Pinder, our director of financial services. Our legal department, Mary Kane, has been involved in some of the setup that we need to have in place for training for contractors. And Danny Ledesma is a contract owner of many, especially student instructional contracts and community-based organizations. We also have Dr. Cuellar's team in instruction that where there's 3 areas that also have contracts under his leadership. And so the responses come from all of those areas. And I would say that you will find times in there where you see, for instance, if you look at 1 and 2 and 2A, while there are 3 separate findings, there's really one solution for those 3 separate findings. So you will find that you can see number 2 and 2A both say C response to recommendation 1 above. So just be aware that they're some of them are grouped together, and there isn't necessarily a different solution for each individual recommendation, but it is, we have responded to all of the recommendations. And with that, I would like to just kind of open it up to Emily, who has worked probably the most on this document, and just to give some highlights of what you've already been able to implement and even ahead of schedule. We'd love to hear that.
Great, thank you. So I will just quickly outline what we have completed so far here in the finance department. So that, again, that includes purchasing and contracting, as well as Tracy Pinder's work in accounting. And I'm also very familiar with legal counsel's work on this, because Mary Kane and I have worked together on a lot of it. So I can quickly outline some of those things. So what we have already completed in response to this audit. First, we changed the annual mandatory contracting course deadline, so that now it is required of all contract managers to take the course before they submit a contract for the fiscal year. So in the past, we had a grace period, and because a lot of contracts were submitted during that grace period, that meant that some of those contract managers were not taking the course and didn't get the benefit of it before they put contracts together. So again, we put out the course this year in late June. We made it immediately required as of July 1st for any contracts submitted for the 2021 fiscal year. We also added to the mandatory contracting course. We added additional guidance on contract review and evaluation, and also of keeping a record of performance and outcomes. We added guidance on how to draft an appropriately detailed scope of work. We added guidance that use of the extensive specialized scope of work template for large student instructional and family engagement contracts is mandatory. Another thing we've already achieved just with the last board meeting is we began publicly posting the scopes of work for large student instructional and family engagement contracts with the board materials, so that those are viewable by the public. On the issue of prompt payment of invoices, we have started tracking invoice receipt date and informing our contract managers in the training course and otherwise that they need to track and submit the invoice receipt date when they submit invoices to accounts payable, so that we can better track the flow from receipt to payment and ensure that invoices are being timely paid. And the AP or accounts payable department is also working with our financial systems team on areas within our PeopleSoft ERP to streamline invoice entry and decrease accounts payable turnaround time. So in process, my team has been now for a year now implementing new contract management software called Cobblestone, which has many benefits, but for the purposes of this audit, I'll just list a few. It will provide a central and accessible location for contract managers to access and save all contract-related documents with the contract record. And we have implemented and are using Cobblestone now for all of our processing and workflow within purchasing and contracting, but we'll be training contract managers over the next few months, and we will certainly instruct them to save any reports or other deliverables with the contract record so that they are centrally accessible, which is not something we've had in the past. Cobblestone also has the ability to track invoice submissions and payment status because it will integrate with our PeopleSoft financial system. It has the ability for purchasing staff to trigger surveys and reminders at contract end, and the ability of contract managers to insert deliverable due dates and receive automatic reminders through the system through email. I've also been working closely with General Counsel's office, who has convened a group of leaders working on developing specifications and mechanisms for including training requirements in applicable personal services contracts. So that is contractor training requirements. This group is also exploring how best to ensure contractor compliance, which is a challenging issue. And as soon as clear guidance is developed, we will include the requirements in our templates, in our RFPs, communicate the new expectations with contract managers, include the expectations in the next revision of the mandatory training course. So that is the brief summary of where we are.
Great. So before
And with that, we're going to open to questions.
Absolutely.
So before, I know that between the Secretary of State's audit and this audit, that there's been a lot of time spent and also an investment by the district in tools and processes to get our arms around, I think, a big complex contracting system. And there's a lot of money and funds flowing through the district. And so I think I want to thank Emily, you and your team, and Claire, you and your team, for the work that's been done and some of the improvements that have been made to date. I'm gonna, maybe we can go around just each one of us and raise maybe a couple questions, not all of them, and then if we have time, we can go for another circuit. So think about what your 2 or 3 most biggest issues are that you'd like to ask about, and then that way everybody will have a chance to ask some questions, and your lower priority items, if you don't get to raise them, we'll do that outside afterwards. So I don't know, Scott, if you want to start. You're on mute.
And so much the better when I am on mute. I don't have any questions at this point. I did a fairly detailed reading through the first half, and I'm still working my way through catching up on things. I mean, it looked like a lot of we accept the recommendation and here's how we're implementing it. There were also some pushback around we don't have the staffing to do that. You know, not a bad idea, but and some other pushback around this is you know, this is a complex system, and that's just not going to happen, at least in this lifetime. You know, again, I didn't see any this is a crazy idea. It was more what's practical and what are we staffed to do, and then a whole lot of we'll do that. That's my reading so far. So I really, it didn't really raise any questions or red flags or anything like that with me so far.
Kate? You're on mute.
I think we'd all be used to this by now. I had one question. Like Scott, I'm still working through some of the material, but on the contracts section, if you find someone submitting a contract has not completed that training, do you then, what do you do? Do you send the contract back, or?
Yep, we notify the contract manager that we haven't taken the training yet, and we hold the contract and do not run it through our review and approval process, and don't sign it, of course, until they have taken the training.
Okay, that might be a good point to note there. But that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Parker or Jackson?
Sure. I have sort of a question concerning Cobblestone. You mentioned that it's a program that saves the transactions around a contract. Is that correct?
So it's going to integrate with PeopleSoft. So whenever a payment is made on a contract, or an encumbrance occurs on a contract, it'll draw in that financial information. So we can go into Cobblestone, look up a contract, have all the information we're tracking, which we already track. When does this expire? Is it renewable? Has it gone to the board? Has it been amended, et cetera, as well as that's where the actual contract documents and approval papers and so forth are all saved. But it'll also pull in that financial information so you can see how much has been actually spent on this contract. And we haven't had that integration between systems before.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Because my understanding was historically there was almost a lack of information surrounding contracts from the past, and Cobblestone will help to sort of keep track of historically of contracts a while ago, and then also sort of keep tabs on them. Is that correct?
So we've been tracking contracts in my department in a different software system since 2006. And we have those all saved on a separate drive. So we've got we had our tracking database. We had all the contracts saved. And then we have PeopleSoft where you could grab the financial information. The problem was you had to go to 3 different places. Okay. And those weren't all accessible to all the staff who work on contracts. They were certainly accessible to my staff and other finance. But now we have a system that's going to bring all that information as well as the document saving in one place, which is accessible to anybody who has a login.
Okay, streamlining the process essentially.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Jackson?
Yeah, I had a couple questions, but the first one is around number 18. And the recommendation was kind of about prior to assigning this role of contract manager to employees who already have full-time employment in another job area, making sure that they can take on that responsibility and making sure that that is that they are able to fill both that contract manager duty and the duties that they already have. And I'm wondering, for especially the instructional leadership plan, what as needed specifies and why not all contracts managers would be subjected to this review.
So I don't want to speak for the instructional leadership and what they intended there. So maybe that's a question that we could follow up with them and get back to you.
Roseanne or Kara, which one of you are taking notes for? Okay, if you could just maybe keep a running tab on some of the follow-up items, because there's going to be a few more. Anything else, Jackson?
Yeah, just one last thing. For number 3C, it says that, sorry, this is another instructional leadership, but I guess it kind of is in the purchasing and contracting as well. But what is the accountability measures in place to make sure that if contract managers don't submit evaluations, like how are we making sure that they are?
So that's tricky. I mean, that is something for each supervisor of a contract manager to track and ensure that contract managers are doing what they need to do to be in compliance. But, we in purchasing and contracting process review, approve about 1,600 separate contracts a year from everything from construction, field trips, space rentals, to these sorts of large instructional kinds of contracts where a lot of this audit focused really. And so having an across-the-board requirement for all those different kinds of contracts wouldn't make sense because there's not a one-size-fits-all requirement. So we are, and not every contract results in or requires reports, for example. So that's really going to apply more to your instructional contracts. And it's unfortunately not something that my team has staff to track contracts after they've been signed. I mean, we track the expiration certainly, and we ensure that they don't go over their encumbered amount. But we can't go back and supervise contract managers. That's really in their supervisor's hands.
Great. So I have a couple questions. I'm going to just flag a couple things. I guess this would be the list, Roseanne or Kara, of some future things. There are a number of items that number 7. Let's see. It's items 10, 11, 12, 13, that all reference that the general counsel office has determined that the release of information forms are not required. And I know, Emily, you said at the very beginning you'd been working with the general counsel's office. I think it would be important for us to have somewhere that memorialized, that opinion that the release of information form is not needed because we have these other things. So if we could just formalize that and provide it to the committee so that we have that and we know what we're relying on in that case. So that would be one thing. And somewhat tied to that, another, and this is just a general comment, is for those items that once they're marked as completed, if there is evidence of the completion, it would be useful to have document links to the evidence of the marking of we've completed it, and here if there's a specific deliverable or something, a tool or something else that could be used that that be sort of accompanies the completed.
Send you a link to the contract training so you all could take it.
Pardon?
I said I could send you a link to the contract training so you all could take it.
I mean, that would be an example, I think, of something. Or like, again, if the general counsel's office has issued an opinion that we don't need X, and so therefore we're not going to do these 4 items, or these 4 items is not necessary for us to address them, that we have that. Then there's a number of these items that aren't implemented till March 31st. And given that some of these are holdovers from the Secretary of State's audit, it seems like it would be that the dates, that's too long of a lag time. Some of these things I'm surprised that we're not implementing right now.
Can you give me an example I can look at?
Okay, well, so for example, we passed the professional conduct. This is a July one. We passed the professional conduct policy a year and a half ago, and there's several things that relate to that aren't going to be implemented until July 1 of 2021. And then there is, developing internal controls around, say, number 8 is one that has March 2021. And I think we already said some of these things in the Secretary of State's audit that we were going to implement it earlier. So I'm curious about that. And then probably my biggest substantive set of questions revolve around 17, 18, and 19 and the actual performance management. So this isn't anything related to the mechanics of of issuing the contracts or anything like that, because I do think we have a pretty tight process, and that the process was already solid, and additional improvements happened through the Secretary of State's office. And I think then, as Emily mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, more additional improvements have been made and changes. So it's not really at the front end of when we're doing the contract, but once the contract has been let, and so the oversight, and then the evaluation and the performance management. And those kind of go to 17, 18, and 19. And again, I think, March 21st is, my expectation is those were going to be implemented this fall when we approved a whole series of contracts versus saying it's going to be in the spring.
So again, I don't want to speak to instructional leadership and what they intended there with those dates. I do know that I did put March for a few of mine, and that had to do with the time required just to finish the Cobblestone PeopleSoft integration and then train all our contract managers, especially in this virtual environment. And that's the whole software implementation and customization and integration process is just taking a great deal of time, but we're getting close. So I did need those months to finalize all of our training and instructional materials. And then I can also speak to—
I'm sorry, Emily, on those, can you just flag maybe send it to Roseanne or Kara, that which ones that are dependent upon a Cobblestone training?
Yes, I will.
I don't need it right now, but it would be useful to know which ones of those.
Yep. Yes. And then as far as the contractor training requirements. So I've been involved with the group convened by the General Counsel's office since late last spring or early this summer, I believe. And it's very complex, figuring out how to give contractors access to the training platform. Right now, it involves giving them PPS email addresses. And when we're talking about all contractors and all of their staff, PPS email addresses, that's problematic. If we have them do training outside of the Pepper platform, then we can't track whether they took the training or not, but that is one idea, is to put it on a website and they have to certify that they took the training. There's also a lot of complexity about which contractors must take this training. Is it those who are going to have direct unsupervised contact with students? Is it beyond that? And then which trainings? And then how much time does that take? And are we paying for that time? So, and then we have all these little contracts where somebody may have direct unsupervised contact with students, but they're there for all of it, an hour or two. Or maybe they have student contact because they're coming for an assembly and we can't ask all of our assembly presenters to have to take extensive trainings. So these are the kinds of issues that this whole group that includes General Counsel's office, purchasing and contracting, several instructional departments, HR, and IT are wrestling with, and there aren't easy answers.
So maybe, because I say just the lag time, and because it's a student safety issue, maybe, and we could get an interim update on sort of, because it does sound complex, but it also sounds like a long period of time before we're implementing something that's actually current policy. And it's around student safety. So maybe offline, we can have a conversation, Emily, about how we could get an update, or here's what the timeline is for the pieces to be implemented, versus we're just looking for a July, hitting a July deadline. I want to.
Sorry, Mary Kane is preparing an update to the board on this very issue, and that is in the works right now.
Okay, great. I'm glad to hear that. Michelle, I want to welcome back. Do you have any questions about while you were gone, we just did a round robin of at least your, your top questions, and then anything that we could also do additional follow-up after the meeting, but go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking for the number. I'm having a hard time reading it on my screen, but I think it's number 4, and it has to do with developing the internal controls that'll ensure the contracts include appropriate and specific deliverables, performance measures, expected outcomes. And so I was just curious, just from the staff side, where we are in proceeding with putting these measures in place. And it looks like there's an evaluation being developed, and just I'd like to be updated on that. It is number 4.
Let me just
I had that one circled too, so I'm glad you raised it, Michelle.
And I was prepared to, just to follow up by email, but since we're gathered here, we might as well. I do have a question about like where we are with the evaluation, developing it. Is that going to be, are we going to be evaluating ourselves? Are we getting a third party? And I've just closed out of the tab, unfortunately. Let's see if we can get it back.
Is that,
do you mean the evaluation of contract? Where? Can you explain what you mean by where are we with the evaluation?
I'm talking about when we let the contracts, specifically for our ResJ, our partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm having tech problems today. I have tech problems every day, but I just closed out of the tab. So I was curious about where we are developing an evaluation, if that's an internal evaluation or a third party, and what types of performance measures are we talking about?
Yeah.
Or may have a better understanding. That work's being led by Danny Ledesma and Russ Brown, I believe. So I'm not sure, but Claire, do you have anything to add there?
So I believe that Danny Ledesma sent out an update to the board on the timing of the work between she and Russ. So I don't have it memorized in my head, but I know it's later this fall that they're planning on bringing metrics back to the board on the contracts for the RESJ work and the CBOs and contracts that have already been approved by the board.
Yeah, so the ones we approved, it said September 30th, the vast majority of them. Then the last board meeting, it was, I think, sometime before December, but we'd be halfway through the contracts, frankly, by December. So we haven't had those yet, but I think what Michelle's getting at is, so we have performance metrics, the work's done, who's actually doing the evaluation of whether the service that were provided were effective and accomplished their outcomes. Is that what you were asking, Michelle?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, so the contracts, right now don't have performance measures installed. And I'm just curious, with all of those different partnerships we have, what the expectations are, and how will we know whether we're successful, and what type of reporting, we have. I know when I managed contracts for the city of Portland, that depending on who the contractor was, if it was a CBO specifically, we would do an in-person evaluation every other year. And we went down through a checklist of performance measures to make sure that they were hitting the targets that they'd set with us. And I was just curious what PPS's process was with that. And again, where we were with the developing the evaluation tool.
I think that Danny's going to be joining us to answer some of your questions, Director Bass.
I see that Danny just joined.
So I think we might have a little bit of a difference of opinion. So the contracts as is, they do have performance measures, and the what's missing from the contracts is the shared report. We are in the process of working with our new performance management staff person, Dr. Pitts, and along with Dr. Brown, to develop the overall sort of evaluation of these contracts. And in the memo, I think one of the challenges is that in order to establish an evaluation framework, you have to set a baseline, and neither last year nor this year prove, I think would be sort of a sort of meaningful baseline given all the disruption that's as it happened as a result of COVID. So Russ and I are meeting with Dr. Pitts. We've got a sort of framework for that shared report. It's in process now, and we should be able to deliver it in the memo that I sent to the board. We said that we'd have that by the end of October. The delay has been that we've been, as you just recalled, we just finalized the last contracts in early October. So we wanted to give our folks a chance to be able to sort of negotiate those final contracts before we sort of develop that shared report.
I guess I'm confused then, because in the contracts itself that we were voting on, it said that the final performance measures would be set. And when I look at inside, and I think the structure is very strong. And I really think that's part of the RFP process you all did this last year. But I think the final performance metrics, when I'm reading through it, what I'm thinking about, and like I say, it says final performance metrics to be finished on something like increase the decrease absenteeism is, say, for like a listed goal.
Sure.
But what you would have is, the actual performance metric of like, here's what it is, a baseline, and then here's what the contractor, based on the set of strategies or tactics, is saying they're going to accomplish in terms of vis-a-vis that overall goal. So there is a goal and a topic, but it doesn't actually have like, here's our expectation of what's going to be accomplished. So that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I'm happy to walk you through that. So in the contract right now, there are performance measures in two places. The first place is the goals and activities as you describe, as well as a set of deliverables that are the performance measures. What is different than what you've seen in years past is that we asked folks to report back out on attendance. We're not asking them to report out on attendance this year because that's information that we have access to. In our investment strategy that was based on what the RFP was based on, the relevant research pointed to three key indicators that had to do with success for these types of programs. The first was the amount of time spent in eliciting the strategies. And so that is a performance measure that's in each of the contract. You'll notice that we have both a time per student and a time per family. The other indicator that the relevant research pointed to was the demographics of the learning adults who's delivering the program. And so that performance measure is also contained in that table where we're asking them to report on the demographic diversity of the staff who are employing the strategy. And then the third one was sort of fidelity to the strategy. And so that's where we have the sort of goals and activities lined out. So what you'll see in the shared report is a sort of template that asks them to report on those things in relationship to the logic model that they all submitted. And then what we will be doing separate from the performance measures and the evaluation is looking at the overall impact of all of these on the sort of outcomes that you mentioned that could look like attendance, but this year would not be a good year to baseline attendance given the different things. So I think that's where maybe we have a little bit of difference in terms of the nomenclature. So we'll be sharing that shared report out with folks by the end of the month.
Yeah, well, I guess, and we should take this offline, but the actually in the contract it says the goals weren't finalized on all of them. So if that was inaccurate, we should probably take it out of the contract. But every contract we've voted on in that particular area for the last 3 or 4 meetings have all said that they weren't completed. But I think we should probably a richer conversation, so we're all using the same terminology and have an understanding of what those performance measures would be. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So what I'm going to ask is if anybody has additional questions or issues they want to raise, and we certainly have some that we've already brought forward, please send them to me. I'll try and compile them all, share them out with everybody on the committee of what the sort of outstanding issues are, and we can then probably set up a meeting with Emily and Claire to walk through how we might address any of the questions or issues that came up. Does that work for people?
Yeah. Yes. And Janice lost power. So she had to.
Oh no.
Yeah, she called me.
Okay. Well, fortunately, she got her piece done. The last item that I wanted to raise was at the last meeting, we talked about the vacancy we have on the committee for a community member. And we had the draft that we had used for the solicit community members last time had a very heavy focus on auditing. Like if you have auditing experience, like this is a committee for you. And we made a decision that we wanted to like open the aperture. We wanted to actually go out and tap some people in the community to ask them to apply to be on the committee, and we didn't want it just to be people who had auditing experiences. So we created a redraft of, and I don't know, Kara, if you can put it up on the screen, but if everyone's okay with where we've landed, we can go out, and I want to thank Director DePass for identifying some individuals who might be interested, and also talking to some of the municipal or the local and regional auditors and coming up with some potential names. Kara, are you able to pull that up? Or Roseanne?
Just a second, I'm pulling it up right now.
And the other thing that people should know is that we took that language out because we wanted to create a pathway to make this committee more diverse. So the City of Portland auditor has recently gone through a diverse, changing up their hiring process for incoming auditors. And I was inspired by that work to see if we could broaden our language around like who we're actually looking for.
So again, auditing is not a requirement. I mean, we did try and like have a little bit of truth in advertising of what you're going to be doing here. Can't get away from that. But not making auditing being like a required skill, listing some other places where people might bring some expertise, also valuing a commitment to public education as well. So I'm curious if anybody has any sort of final edits, or if they want to send me final edits, but we'd like to start circulating this, and actually in the next 3 weeks, solicit interest and move to fill that last seat on the audit committee. Anybody have any suggestions or things they want to change?
Or names that we want to, are we still recruiting through the Google form? I mean, are we using that on our website in terms of soliciting interest?
So we haven't even posted this yet because I wanted to make sure everybody's okay with the redraft, but yes. So we thought there'd be 2 ways that we would not only post this, but also circulate it to individuals that both Kari Guy, who is the cycling off community member, but also that Michelle came up with. And certainly anybody that this can be circulated to anybody, and that we'd like to have a more diverse committee and also fill the slot. So if nobody has any additional changes, we can go ahead and get it posted and then start circulating it and use the Google form. Any comments?
No.
Okay. And I guess the question for Roseanne, I think she's off the screen, is there's a apply here. Can we do the back end work on getting that connected to the Google form that Michelle had sent over to and shared with us last committee meeting?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. All right. Is there anything else that anybody would like to raise before we adjourn? Okay, we're adjourned.